which I need to do now. So with the recording of the session, we will be posting that out on our YouTube channel site. We'll also be posting that on our community site. And again, the questions that come from the audience will be posted with that conference recording. So you should be able to share that to other colleagues at your organizations that didn't get a chance to go through the training, and you know, it'll be up indefinitely over the long term. So, and then again, we will, in our community, we will continue to discuss better ways to do that. But I want to make sure that we're getting you the recording. Everybody knows about it. They have easy access to it, and I want to make sure that we're answering your questions in a written form, and you've got a forum to kind of collaborate back and forth. So again, this is the first of what we plan to do is 6 webinars this year. We are going to try to center those webinars around Uniprint, Uniprint administration, and some of the various components within Uniprint. Those topics will be determined from some of the surveys that we'll ask you to fill out after this. So we would like you to have or provide us with feedback from a survey that will go out and give us thoughts and ideas for what you'd like to see some deep dives on. And we'll do our best to collaborate on or consolidate those that have similar topics, just in terms of the number of people that are interested in various things. So we'll try to do our best for focusing those, and certainly try to do our best just to pass this knowledge on. The session, again, is being recorded, as I mentioned, YouTube channel on the Pharos community site. And then again, for questions at the end of the session, please post them in the chat location, and we will open it up for questions towards the end here. Brian, if you want to skip to the next slide. So we had an excellent conference this year, and we will be doing another conference coming up, hopefully in 2017 here, and would like to certainly put a plug in for that. I think for those just starting out with administering the system, we are going to be doing some special tracks to provide more technical training on the Pharos products in the next user conference. I'm sure a number of you that are on the call here have potentially joined the user conference. We did get some good feedback on requesting some additional technical training, maybe some deep dives in various pieces of the administrator and Uniprint in general. So we hope to bring that to you over the in the next user conference. So we'll keep you posted on that. More information on the community as it gets closer. And having said that, I think we will move forward into the training. So without further ado, I'll introduce Brian Rosengarten, who is one of our senior support engineers and installation engineers. Brian's been working with the product for a good 4 years with us and has been numerous sites and probably met and talked to many of you folks that are on the phone today. So we'll let Brian kind of jump into it here. There's definitely going to be a lot of detail, so pay attention closely. And again, we'll have the recording so you can listen to that later on. I want to thank you for your support. We are, again, very thrilled to have a number of customers that are interested in joining us today. And again, we will make sure that we put information out for the next one coming up and keep everybody up to speed on Uniprint and changes in Uniprint and making sure people know how to administer it. So Brian, thank you for jumping in here and providing the webinar for us.
Thank you, Frank. Appreciate it. Nice introduction there. Also, along with us for the ride is Jeff Geller. Many of you probably have interacted with Jeff as well on the phone, or if not face-to-face, especially at the conference. So he might be interjecting from time to time throughout this webinar. So you're here because you have been given the daunting task of administering Uniprint for your organization and institution. Some of you may have been handed this opportunity not knowing what you were being handed, and you might find it a bit overwhelming. Some of you might be brand new to Uniprint, and you might actually be given this opportunity now and just been told about it. And other of you might actually have already had quite a bit of experience with this, and this might be a refresher for you. Either way, we're going to cover a lot of ground today in a short period of time. So we're not going to dive extremely deep into really big details, but we're going to cover a large amount of information. That's where the question part at the end will come in handy if you have specific questions that may not have been covered today. So Uniprint in and of itself has several different server components. We have a principal server, which I like to call the mothership. It controls all of its children and makes sure everybody's in line, and it also talks to the SQL database. We also have the Pharos database and a print server or multiple print servers that would talk to the principal server, and then mobile print with an external application that runs alongside Uniprint that shares some of the same resources, specifically the Pharos Print Center. And that enables you to upload jobs from mobile devices. There's also several applications that come along with Uniprint. Pharos Administrator, which we're going to discuss today. Pharos Remote, which is kind of a stripped-down version of Pharos Administrator that we'll also cover in very short, that is predominantly given to librarians or lab technicians to help users that might be having trouble with jobs that might be stuck or didn't come out properly. Pharos Reports, an application that administrators can use to run crystal reports against the database to find out how much money is being spent, which printers are being used the most, is color being printed out more than black and white, et cetera, et cetera. And then last but not least, the Pharos Print Center, the shared resource, a web page that can be accessed from anywhere in the world or limited to just your own network for users to upload jobs, change jobs from simplex to duplex, from black and white to color, vice versa, and whatnot. But today, we're going to concentrate all of our efforts on Pharos Administrator, because covering all of those in an hour and a half to 2 hours just cannot be done. It really can't. So I have a VM here running Uniprint 9.0 R2, our latest version of Uniprint, and we're looking at Pharos Administrator. And you'll notice that it came up by default. Well, it doesn't come up by default, but I brought up the server configuration screen. So Pharos Administrator, it's a GUI to contact and communicate with the Pharos database on your SQL server. It provides you the means of being able to make changes in configuration and setting up your entire system without having to be a SQL expert of any kind. You don't need to run any kind of SQL queries. It'll take care of it for you. It's built on MMC. As you can see, there's kind of a shell here, and Remote is very similar. On the left-hand side, you'll have a series of items, menus that you can go through, and on the right, you'll have actions that will change based on what you select on the left. So right now I'm at server configuration. If I were to go to system settings, not only do the actions on the right change from time to time, but all of the items in the middle will show you what is pertaining to that section you're looking at. If I were to come to users, drill down into that and look at accounts, you'll see the actions really changed here. The reason why I had started with server configuration is because Pharos Administrator, although it being an application that you're going to use on a regular basis, it's not something you probably will come into every single day unless you're making changes on a daily basis, which is not normal. I do recommend that you come in every 2 or 3 days just to make sure that things are looking good. Now in server configuration screen, you can see that I've got a green dot. When the dot is green, that means everything, all of the services that are running on this server are in a good, healthy state. Now, I only have one server here. If you had multiple servers, including multiple print servers, they would all show up in the list, and you'd be able to drill down into it by clicking the little arrow here on the right. So I just opened mine up, and you can see every service that's being utilized by Uniprint and its current status. So everything's green. Everything's great. My system's very healthy. However, if you saw anything in yellow, that would be considered a warning. You might want to go in there and look and see what's going on. And if anything's in red, something is definitely down, and you want to take care of it as soon as possible. So the reason why I recommend you come in here every 2 or 3 days is just to make sure everything looks good, because you may not know that something's down unless somebody tells you that there's a problem, and you don't want other people telling you there's a problem. You want to discover that problem before other people actually incur it on their own. So the server config screen shows us the secure release service, the REST API service, which is used by the Pharos Print Center. We can look at the updater service, which we're going to go through later. We can see that the connection to the database is good. And as we scroll down, we can see other things like the EDI service, which handles communication between terminals and Uniprint. Looks great, and pop-up server is good, LPD is fine, and online service is good. Another area that you'll not come in too often, but is very handy to you, would be considered license limits. So under System, I just clicked on License Limits, and the license summary will show you not only your site key, which will ask of you anytime that you contact Pharos support. We'll want to know what your license site code is. That way we can pull up your account and find more information about your account more easily. It also shows us the expiration date. That's very important, because if you don't know your expiration date and your expiration comes, the print services will cease to function, and people will no longer be able to print. And you definitely don't want that. If you've ever incurred anybody who has not been able to print their job, you know that the wrath will be on you, and it's the end of the world without being able to print. You can also take a look at your license features that your license key is turned on for. And as you can see here, I've got third-party charging on mine, which we're going to go through in a bit. Sign up, I'm not going to cover today, which provides the means for a reservation system predominantly used by libraries for patrons to be able to come in to the library and reserve a time to use the public computer. Again, we're not going to cover that today. Uniprint, off the glass, is for copying, authentication and billing gateways, and then the credit card gateway, which we're not going to really cover either one of these in today's discussion. We can also look at our license limits, how many print servers you can have, 65,535. I think we can function under those terms. We can definitely get our job done. Our off-the-glass expiration date. And then as we scroll down, we can see the licensed external devices. These are IMFPs and Omega devices that we'd interact with for secure release and authentication of users. It's broken down based on manufacturer, and then the Omegas, as you can see here, the PS150s, the PS200s, and the PS60s. For example, the PS60s, this license allows for 5 of them, but none are in use. And as you can see, my license key, I'm not using any IMFPs, so none are in use, but I have a lot to work with. Brings me to our next section, which is probably the most confusing of all of Pharos Administrator, in my personal opinion, which would be an output management, understanding this organization and how things relate to each other when it comes to devices and release stations and queues and print groups. It could be a little overwhelming. But once you have a thorough grasp of those 4 components and how they interact with each other, the rest of this is really going to start to fall in line. For me, that was personally my most difficult task, was understanding all that. And then everything really started to make sense to me. So print groups. What is a print group? It's a logical grouping of printers, any way you see fit. You might have a print group that is dedicated to your entire institution and only have one. Now you'll notice there's another one up here, that's mobile print group. That comes with the system as part of the installation. You can't get rid of that. I'm talking about other ones that you would add on. So you always have at least 2, one you created in the mobile print group. You might have a print group that's associated with the English department, one for the library, one for students, one for staff and faculty. You dream it up, you can create it. What's important to understand about that print group is that you are going to associate printers to that print group. You can see down here on the bottom section where it says related printers, I have 3 printers that are associated to this print group. Now I only have 3 printers on my entire system. However, you might have hundreds, and you may or may not associate all those printers with that print group. Obviously, for it to be a functional print group, you're going to have at least 1. But there's no rhyme or reason or solid on how many you should have. It's totally up to you. So the printers are directly linked to the print groups, and this started, I believe, with Uniprint 8.3 or 8.4. Before that, print groups did not exist. So if you've been around with Uniprint for a while, you probably knew a time when there was no such thing as a print group in Uniprint. Above this, related printers on the bottom, you'll see a job cost method. The job cost method, which we're going to go to in greater detail in a bit, is the way to put together charging for print jobs. It's your menu, per se, of how much you're going to charge for a print job based on some type of criteria. And above that, you'll see a purge time in minutes. Now, I've got mine set for 240. That means that if, for some reason, I send a print job to a printer that is associated with this print group, and I do not release that job within 240 minutes, that job is going to be deleted from the system. That's great. We call that cost savings because in the past, users would walk up, users would go file print on their workstation and they put 4 or 5 documents and they really probably didn't need them all. And they really turned out and they only need 1 or 2. And then you've wasted paper, you've wasted ink. In this case, when you've got secure release being used and you have a purge time at 240 minutes, you've now given them the option to not release it or come back and re-release, not re-release, but release the job at a later time within that time period. Now, 240 is not the default. I believe it's 120. I set mine for 240, though. I seem to think that that is a solid time period. 4 hours. If someone hasn't released their job in 4 hours, they probably don't want it at that point. And above that, you'll notice it says print type and the secure release. Now, there's 2 different print types, direct printing and secure release. Direct printing would be more synonymous with the old way we used to print. Users would open up on their workstation Word or whatever they might be in. They go file, they click the queue or the printer they wanted to print to. They'd hit print and the paper would come out with their document on it. Might be adjacent to them, like maybe what you do at home, or it might be on the other side of the room, but the print job would come out immediately after hitting print. Whereas secure release holds that job into a secure queue. The queue in this respect is not analogous with something that would be considered a line, because it's really not a line. It's more of like a holding bucket. There's no first come, first served in a queue. It's just a place where that job could be held for the user when they're ready to walk up to some form of device, whether it be a multifunction printer or an IMFP as we call them, or an Omega device, which we're going to go through momentarily, a PC release station, authenticate themselves, whether it be against Active Directory via LDAP or just the Pharos database, and select their job. Whether they can see only their jobs or everybody's jobs is up to the configuration of your system, and then print it. And they're not required to print all of their jobs. They can just select which ones they want at that point in time. So secure release, and a time when security is really, really important, brings printing up to the next level of being more safe. I mean, if you were to accidentally print something that came out of a printer and someone else retrieved that and it had social security numbers or credit card numbers or anything of that sort, any type of financial information or personal information, and it got in the hands of the wrong person, it would not be a good day for you on the job. You definitely want to try to avoid that. So print groups, a logical grouping of printers into one name with a specific charging and given a print type, which would be secure release or direct printing. Which brings me to devices. What is a device? Well, the device in our view is the actual physical piece of hardware that does the printing or the copying. And as you can see, I've got 3 in the top here: Rochester C3003, Test 1, and Test 2. If I look at the bottom, I can drill down and look at each one of these and all their details and in a more detailed view. So looking under General, I can see I gave it a name of Rochester-C3003. When you're doing things named, I generally recommend not using any spaces. Dashes and underscores are great. If you don't like those, you can just put it together. That looks like this without a dash, and that's fine too. I try to avoid spaces whenever at all possible. Databases are not big fans of spaces. The device function, whether it's a copier or printer or both, you can decide. It could be either or. And whether or not the device is active. Yeah, a lot of people forget this. They'll set everything up and it looks perfect. They'll accidentally not see that something is set to no, and it won't work. And you want this at yes. So it's kind of a on-off switch for the actual device itself. And then if you're using access times within Uniprint, you can decide which access time that you want to allow that device to be used. So let's say you've created an access time where this device can only be used from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. You would create an access time, give it a name, assign it to this device, and then anybody who walked up to it at 6 p.m. would not be able to utilize that device. It just would not be available. It's more common to have an unrestricted, but there are times when you might want to have an access time. And we're not going to go into that to great detail today. That's pretty much as far as I'm going to go into access times. And then we come down to the printer section, and we have something called a reprint holding period in minutes. Now this is 30 minutes, which is different than the 240 minutes we were looking at before. The difference is that if I walked up to a device, found my job, printed it out, and I decided 20 minutes later that I would like to reprint that job, I don't want to walk up to the device and go through the process of making a quote-unquote copy, using the machine as a copier. I just want to reprint it. And I also don't want to have to log back into a workstation, find my document, go file, print, or what may it be. I want to just walk up to the device, authenticate myself, still see my print job, and print it. And that's what the reprint holding period is. And the default is 30 minutes, but you can change this to anything you want. It comes in very handy, especially if you're a staff or a faculty member. It's probably not used as much by a student, but a staff and faculty member would definitely want the ability to reprint something shortly after they've already printed it. You can also limit the device by job attributes, which is the next section here. This allows you to select which paper sizes can or cannot be used by this particular device. I tend to use all attributes so that any paper size is allowed, but if you want to say, hey, this device, we're not going to allow anything besides 8.5 by 11 letter, then you can select letter, click OK, and now only letter can be used for that particular device. So I'm going to take that off. And you notice when I make changes, these changes are being done automatically inside the database. There's no save button. Once you make a change, that change is done instantaneously. Printer type, I can choose whether this is a color printer or black and white, and by all means, you still happen to have a dot matrix printer somewhere on your network and in your organization, you can use dot matrix. Related print groups. This is very similar to what we saw over in print groups, where we had devices assigned to the print groups. But now we have the devices assigned to the print group the print group assigned to the device. So you'll notice that throughout Uniprint, there may be more than one place that you can actually achieve the same goal. And this is one of those places. And below that, we have release stations. We're going to go to that in more detail momentarily, but this is the release station that is associated with the device. In this case, I only have one release station. It's called Rochester, and that would be the device that I would walk up to actually authenticate myself and release the job. Below that, we have servers. That's the server that this device is associated with. We can see the make and model of this device here. This is a Ricoh MP C3003. And then as we move down into copier, we differentiate between printing and copying. They're two different things, especially when it comes to charging. So we can associate different jobs charging to the copier if we want, as opposed to printing. And the copy line configuration allows us to associate the job cost method costs that are set, which we'll go through later, to the copier based on copy line configuration here. Usually what you'll wind up seeing is the first one being starting at 0 and then going all the way through to the rest. In this case, there's 4 of them, so that's 0 through 3. And then the copy station that's associated with the device. Important. If you're using this as a copier and a printer, you definitely want that copy station to match the release station that is assigned for the printer itself. Okay. Otherwise, you might wind up making a copy that will be coming out another location. So just make sure that you have a one-to-one relationship with those. Network information. There's a network address, and there's your IP address associated with the device. The protocol that's used, we have LPR, which is port 515, and then RAW, which is 9100. And that will, and then the SNMP community, if your network has its own SNMP community and port that's being used, you can change that here for the device. The default would be public and port 161. All right, so we've got print groups, logical grouping of printers, the devices that are actually the printers associated with those print groups, and then we come to queues. This is the entity that the user would actually go onto their workstation, file, print, and then choose what we would have normally called a printer, and in this case will be called a queue. When you create a queue within the Uniprint system, it will automatically create a Windows printer object that can be viewed either by print management on the server or in devices and printers if you don't have print management installed on the server. Within that printer queue, the Windows printer object, you can make changes to printer defaults, printer properties, and whatnot. And if you're using packages, which we'll go through later in this conversation, those properties and defaults that are set on that queue will automatically go onto the user's workstation, which comes in very handy if you're trying to force duplexing by default or you're trying to force black and white only for a specific queue. Now, how many queues can you have? You can have as many as you want. You're not limited. Some institutions try to get by with just having one, and that's kind of nice because it makes your system a little bit more robust. The user goes file, print, chooses the one queue, walks up to any release station, may it be an IMFP or an Omega device or a PC release station, selects their job and hits print. And they have the mobility of being able to walk around anywhere within your organization and finding their job and releasing the job. Very, very nice feature. However, I would take it one more step further, especially if your institution happens to be an educational institution and you're dealing with, as we all know, and many of us have been students before, students don't like to follow instructions. They just don't. They like to just do whatever they want. If you give them the means of having two queues to choose, it makes their lives and your life then more simple. Give them a black and white queue and a color queue. On the black and white queue, you would only provide a driver that can print only in black and white. And in the color queue, you would use a different driver that would be able to have the means of being able to release the job as a color job. And the benefit of this is that the user knows that, hey, I want to print this in black and white. They'll choose the black and white queue. It'll always come out in black and white, and they'll always get charged for black and white if you're charging. Same with color. It'll always come out in color, and it'll always get charged in color. Now, obviously, you wouldn't associate a color device to a black and white queue because you can't print out in color on a black and white device, but you could always associate the black and white device with the color queue if you wanted to. Some institutions like to avoid that, and the reason being is that when you print on a color device, even in black and white, it uses different aspects of the toner, and it can be more expensive. So sometimes organizations would like to just limit it to black and white. Is it black and white printers only? Color, the color. Now, when you're thinking about putting your environment together or maybe reorganizing your environment when it comes to the queues, think of it along the lines of who is going to be printing? How do I want them to print? Which devices do I want them to be able to use? For example, you might have a breakdown within your organization. If you're a university, you might have the English department, you might have the science department, and within science you might have chemistry and biology, and you might have a sports and rec department. You might want to limit which departments have access to which queues, which have access to different print groups and devices. So when you're thinking of that, that helps you to determine how many queues you need and who needs queues and who should have access. Now, you might have faculty and staff that may have access to all of the printers, but students you might want to limit to just student queues. You might have a black and white and color student queue, and you might have a black and white and color faculty and staff queue. There's no limit to what you could do with this. You just have to figure out what works best for your organization, configure it the way you think would work, and then go with it. And then you might find that you might need to make some tweaks to that. But when you're creating your queue inside Pharos Administrator, obviously you're going to give it a name. Again, I would recommend avoiding spaces. And you assign that print group to that queue. And this is where it comes, the print groups are very important. Because remember, the print group and the device are logically associated with each other. So are the print group and the queue. So here I've got a print group test 1. If I go back to print groups and look at test 1, I have these 3 printers. That means anything sent to this queue called test 1, 2, 3, 4, I can only walk up to those 3 printers to release those 3 jobs. I'm sorry, to release the job. If I had another queue with only one of those printers, and let's say it was test 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 is the name of the queue, and only one of those printers that is in the print group, Rochester C3003, was in that print group, and I sent the job to that queue associated with that print group, then I can only walk up to that one device to release my job. So it's important to understand how the print group is associated with the device, and the device is associated, and the print group is associated with the queue. Now, when you do choose that print group, remember it was direct or secure release, it automatically assigns whatever that print group has to the print type of this queue. You can have a device that is part of both, obviously it can be as many print groups as you want, but both secure release and direct print. So that is feasible. You can have a device that users can walk up to and have to authenticate themselves. Maybe the students have to, but faculty and staff, if it happens to be a printer that's nearby them, they can use it for direct printing if you wanted to allow that at the same time. And then the job cost method that is associated with that print group also will flow over to the queue, and you can see it reflected here. And you'll notice these 2 things are grayed out, print type and job cost method, because you can't make changes to it here. This is giving you information based on the association with that print group. If I drill down into Windows and printer settings, we can see the server that is associated with the queue. It should only be one server, and in this case I only have one server anyway. And then the driver, which is probably the biggest part of this puzzle when it comes to the queue. In many cases, manufacturers like to push you towards a universal print driver, and that works in a lot of different situations. However, if you have a fleet out there in your organization that consists of many different models within a manufacturer, or even many different manufacturers and models within those manufacturers, a universal print driver may not work for you. Obviously, if you can get away with it, by all means, awesome. But sometimes you come across a printer that requires a driver that has some attribute in it that the universal print driver just can't handle. And if that happens to come across with you, you need to create another queue with that driver installed on the server, and it would be unique to any device that you'd want to have that driver being used on. It's great if you can get away with one, but it's not always feasible. And on the bottom, we have a section for packages, which I said we're going to go through a bit later. But when you're using a package, you're usually having a pop-up, which is a window that would actually appear on the user's workstation. It asks them for their username or a name for the job to differentiate it from something else. And might even ask for a password to password protect the job. That pop-up is associated with a question, and that would be down here. Under queues, you'll see pop-up questions. Now, I only have one on my system right now. The most typical one, username and password. But when we come back to queues, we can see that that question is associated with the package if you're using packages for this queue. And you can force this queue to have to use a pop-up if you wanted to. And you can do that here. Also, you know, a queue called test 1, 2, 3, 4 may not be something you might want to show up on a user's workstation. So even if you name your queue and print group and device all one name, which I highly recommend for continuity purposes, it's great when you can look at these names and not have to decipher what you're seeing. You're basically saying, okay, this is a library, second floor, color. Just by looking at it, you know, hey, that's from the library, second floor, and it's the color printer. I know exactly what that is, rather than using like a serial number or some other piece of information. That gets a little bit more confusing. But if you don't want that information to show up on the user's workstation, you can actually use a different display name here. So I can say, call this, like, say, student printing BW for student printing black and white. And that's what will show up when you install the package on the user's workstation for this queue. They won't see test 1, 2, 3, 4. It'll show up as student printing BW. Now, obviously, if you're going to give it a name that makes sense already to the student, then you don't really need to do that because it'll just show what that name is, and that comes in nice there. All right, so this brings us to part 4 of this grouping of print groups, devices, and queues. All comes together at the release station. Now, we differentiate the release station from the device from a software point of view. The release station and device might actually be the same physical being. It might be the printer. In that case, a multifunction printer, or what we call an IMFP, I stand for integrated. If it has the Pharos embedded software on it, then there's probably a screen that is part of the physical device that the user would interact with the device with. They might swipe a card. They might walk up and tap the screen and type in their username and password. Whatever it may be, that's still called a release station from our point of view, from a software point of view. Whereas the device that we were looking at earlier is the entity of that piece of hardware that actually does the printing or actually does the copying. So from our respects, the release station is the part that handles the authentication, the secure part, where users can interact with the device, say who they are, find their jobs, and say, this is the job I want to release. Now, again, the release station has its own name. I highly recommend, again, I hate to iterate this over and over again, but when you're naming these things, it'll make your job so much easier if you have the release station and the device the same name. The queue is also highly recommended if you could get away with it. It depends on how many queues you have, how many release stations you're using, and how you're organizing things. But by all means, at least have the release station and the device have the same name. So when you look at it, you know that, hey, this release station is associated with that device. Now, generally, when you have a release station, it has a one-to-one relationship. That means when you walk up to this device to authenticate yourself, it's going to come out that device. But that may not always be the case. So let me give you an example. There's 3 different types of release stations. One is called a PC release station, as we can see on the right under Actions. We have Insert PC Release Station, Insert Network Terminal, and that would be a dedicated computer. Its sole job would be for people to walk up to, swipe their card, type in your username and password, select their job, and print it, have it printed. That's it. That's not really a good way to utilize a PC. So there's 2 other alternatives. Number 1 would be what we call an Omega device. That's a physical piece of hardware that connects to your network. It kind of looks like a little iPad mini, and the users would interact with that. Again, they could swipe their card or type in their username and password, and it would communicate with the Pharos Uniprint system and then communicate to the terminal, the device itself, so that the device can print out the job. And then the second option, or third actually, would be what we would call the IMFP, which is the all-in-one unit that can handle both the authentication and the printing and the copying all together in one unit. So this one's called Rochester, and it's associated with one device. There may be times when you may have a release station that is associated with more than one device. You have to be careful with that. So for example, let's say you're in a library, and it's a very busy library, and you've got one person who walks up to the release station, authenticates, chooses their job, and it's the 300-page document. Now, I don't care how fast your printer is, it's still going to take a little bit, several minutes for that 300-page document to come out, if not longer. Now, if you've got user B, and they want to print out their 2-page document, they're going to have to wait for the first one to finish. But if this is a real busy location, you could hypothetically have 2 devices sitting right next to each other, very close to each other. Users would walk up and to a release station, and they would be able to select their job, and it will load balance between the 2. And the reason why you want to make sure that these are close to each other, because I've run across instances where people misconfigured their release stations and associated that release station with more than one device. The user walked up, authenticated, selected their job, they got charged for their job, and they got no paper. Well, it came out. It just came out another device. It came out another device on the other side of the campus. But nobody knew until that person, the technician called us up, and we said, you've got it configured. That job did come out, but it came out this other device. And then, of course, light bulb went off, and why was it set like that, and who did that? And not a big deal, but it's important. If you can avoid that, then it's great. However, there is that one instance when I would recommend having more than one device associated with a release station, because it comes in really handy for load balancing if you're in one location. So looking at the release station here, we've got a terminal type associated with it. This one's generic. If it was an HP, it would say something along the lines of HP and the embedded solution version. Same with Canon, same with Lexmark or Ricoh. Whatever flavor manufacturer it is, it'll show more information there for our embedded product. If it's an Omega device, like a PS150 or a PS200, then it will show up here as well. And then the external name, which is right now it says Gateway ID goes here. If you're using a off, usually I would call it third party, but I don't want you to get confused with third-party charging, which we have within Uniprint. But if you're using a third party to handle all of your billing or additional billing, like Blackboard or Seaboard, an external gateway, Seaboard, CS Gold, or Odyssey, each one of these release stations would need to have an external name associated with it for your configuration for that, and that's what goes here. If you're not using an external billing gateway, then you would not have anything here under the gate for the external name. It would just say Gateway ID goes here. And then the bank, which we'll go through later in this presentation, is set to the release station. Now, when you see the word bank, you think money. Well, it does have to do with money, but it also has to do with logon authentication and your billing as well. You can have as many banks as you want, and you can have several that do different things, but this is where it's associated with the release station. And then the station functions. Is this a print station? Is it a copy station? Does it do both? You can select that right here as well. Inactivity time in seconds. Let's say a user walks up and starts, authenticates and sees their jobs, and then they get interrupted and someone's talking about the game last night, or they forget to log out after they're done. That 30 seconds time is going to log them out automatically if they're not done within that time period. So we have come to the conclusion that 30 seconds is optimal because it gives time for someone to get interrupted from what they were doing and still be able to follow through without accidentally getting logged out. And it's long enough, it's long enough to permit that, and it's short enough that if someone does walk away without hitting usually 30 seconds, it's probably 25 seconds or so after they're done, it will automatically log them out. And then again, access times, which you mentioned earlier, can be associated with the release station. Okay. Not just the device, but the release station as well. Under printing, we can see the print server that this release station is associated with. Obviously, we want that to be the same as the device, and the related printer that is associated with the release station. So you can see here, I've got a one-to-one relationship, one release station to one printer, but I could, like I said before, associate the other printers to this release station as well. And then the last portion on the release station is the copier, and that is, you want to make sure that that copier happens to be the right copier. You want these to match. All right, so print groups, devices, queues, release stations, that's how they all kind of come together into the bigger picture. Now, I stated earlier, when you're making changes within the Pharos Administrator, it's automatically being done in the SQL database. There's no save button. However, from time to time, if you're making changes within Pharos Administrator, you may notice that, hey, I made a change and it's not taking effect at the terminal, at the MFP. Why is that? Well, on the right, under Actions, and just about every screen that you use on the left-hand side, you'll see an option that's called Change Control. And when you select it, this will push out those changes to the actual terminals. It's not something that you want to do after every little change you've done. And the reason being is that when you do hit Change Control, it's going to send the message out to every device, regardless if you made a change to that device or not. And if you've got a very busy organization, the last thing you want to do is taking away some of that processor speed and resources away from the device so that it can't do what it's intended to do, which is print and copy for users. So if you know you're going to make 5, 6, 7 different changes over the next hour or two or whatnot, wait to hit Change Control till you've made all those changes. It'll all get pushed out at once, and you're not going to really impact your system. Now, is it going to be a huge impact if you do it more frequently? Not a huge impact. But if you can avoid having any kind of impact on your system that is not necessary, great to hold out on hitting Change Control when you can. On the left-hand side, you'll see Output Management, where we've just pretty much been working most of our discussion so far. I'm going to come over to Uniprint Global Settings. We talked about pop-ups that request information from the users to associate their job with them as an individual for secure release. There's another type of pop-up, but it's really not considered a pop-up by us. We call it Notify, or another name it goes by is Informed Print. And this gives you the ability on a global basis, without a custom script or some other custom configuration going on. It is a global setting. This will prompt the user to accept cost. So cost information will push out, this job's going to cost X amount of dollars. Are you sure you want to print this out? Because if you do, this is how much it's going to cost. And that comes in really handy if you're doing direct print, because at least if it's a secure release, they have the option of deciding not to print it out. But with direct print, as soon as they hit print, it's boom, it's gone. It's coming out, and they're getting charged. And you can also say apply to only color jobs, so not apply to the black and white jobs. And then the cost threshold, only prompt the user if the job costs at least, I put in $2.50 in here, at least $2.50. Anything underneath that, it won't prompt them. And again, this is a global setting without any kind of custom configuration put together. So that brings me to cost. How do you use Pharos Administrator to designate charging and costing? Well, we call that job cost methods, as you can see over here on the left under charging. You can have as many of these as you want. It automatically comes with one called default job cost method. I generally recommend not using that one because it by default will be at 0. And if there's any time where you need to not charge for anything temporary, maybe it's the first week of classes and you've decided the first week of classes we're not going to charge for any printing. Rather than having to go reconfigure all your attributes, which I'll go through in just a moment, you can easily just switch the job cost method that is associated to the print groups, and that's a much easier way of doing it. I've created another one here called Brian, but I actually am going to work from the one called default job cost method for this presentation. So there's 2 different types of charging, and when you think of job cost methods, think of it as a menu. When you go into a restaurant, here's everything we sell, and this is how much we charge for it. Okay? There's 2 different types of charging. There's attribute costing and there's area costing. Attribute costing will allow you to set prices based on some type of attribute for the print job. Is this a simplex job? Is it a duplex job? Is it black and white? Is it color? Is there stapling involved? Binding? Anything like that. Or area costing, which is more common with maybe an art program or an architecture program, anything that might be printing from a plotter, where it charges based on how much area of the piece of paper is actually being printed on. Not very common. Attribute costing is definitely more common. And how do we set these attributes? There's a section here towards the bottom. It's called per page attribute costs. And you can see I've got 4 per page attribute costs set. When I select this, up comes my attribute menu. And actually, I'm going to turn something off here real quick, so not to confuse you. I'm going to deselect this. I'm going to go through that in a moment. Okay, so on the left-hand side, on the top, we have our paper. On the right, a paper size. And on the right, we have our different attributes. And on the bottom, we have the breakdown with each cost. So I have, on the left, only letters selected. So if I were to scroll down, you would see letter selected. The blank attribute is just simplex, black and white. And you can see I'm charging 10 cents. The next option that I have is color, simplex. It's 20 cents per page. And color duplex, I'm giving a discount for 18 cents a page since they're saving paper. And then black and white duplex would be 8 cents. Again, a nice little discount. On the left, if I were to choose A4, which is real common in Europe, I now have 4 more attributes. The same 2 attributes that are selected on the right, color and duplex, for that specific paper size. And if we look at these attributes, you can see all the different attributes that are available. Binding, booklet, collating, you can see laminate, folding, tumble, stapling is in there as well. To make things a little easier, though, I'm going to deselect that and just deal with letter at the moment. So that's where your attributes come into play. However, there's times when somebody might print a job that falls into an attribute that's not configured by you. That's why I highly recommend you use default per page cost. So if someone were to send an A4 and I'm only configured for letter right now, you would want to at least make sure that they're getting charged for their job. Believe me, there have been times when there's been users who figured out, hey, if I send something with a stapling attribute, regardless if I want it stapled or not, I'm going to get it for free. And you want to try to avoid that. And by putting in the default per page cost, at least you're getting some kind of a cost from them. And you might want to put it high. That might deter them if they're doing something, or it might throw a red flag and saying, we never thought about that attribute, forgot that was out there. Let's put a charging in there for it, and that'll help you with configuring your system a little bit more closely. And then there's a base job cost under the attribute costing, as you can see, for the costing type. Mine's currently set at 0, and that base job cost would be on top of the attribute. So let's say I was printing out, per my cost here, I had a simplex black and white of 10 cents. All right, the job would be 10 cents plus whatever I put in here. So if I have 5 cents for a base job cost, that job's going to cost me 15 cents because it's 10 cents for the black and white simplex, and then a base job cost of 5 cents as well. I can say that I haven't really had much experience with many organizations using that, but I can see instances where they might want to. And so if that's something that you definitely want to put into effect, it's there for you, so you can utilize that. Then there's a per job attribute cost here, and right now I don't have anything assigned, but it basically looks at the attribute, and you can have a blanket cost associated with that attribute per job as well. On the bottom, you saw me deselect the group. There's something called user-based charging. So if I go to groups and select test, which is the group that I created, and then I go back up here to 4 per page attribute cost that I have set right now, you'll notice another column on the bottom section, user-based charging. So if I wanted to charge differently for a specific user group, which we'll go through momentarily, excuse me, I can do so in the same job cost method. So maybe the user base would be the difference between students and the faculty and staff, and I want to get a discount to faculty and staff. I can do that. I can charge them differently within the same job cost method. And then third-party charging gives you the ability to have what we call departmental charging. So you may not be dealing with users' individual accounts with their own money. This comes in real handy with faculty and staff, or maybe even students that might be part of a project within the university. You want them to not have to pay for that job because they're actually maybe student workers that are printing something for their job that's part of this project. You can give them access to what we call cost centers or grants, the third-party charging, which is where I'm heading to now, and that's under charging on the left. I mean, third-party charging. We can look at different charging models. Now, I have a very simple setup here. I have a charging model and a category, and I broke it down to 4 different entities. I've got biology and chemistry, a chemistry grant, and English. Now, there's 2 ways of doing this. There's a cost center, which allows you to keep track of all the printing and all the costs associated with this printing that's being done for that particular cost center. And these are cost centers here: biology, chemistry, and English. Then you can go back and you can use Pharos reports, run reports against that data and find out, hey, how much money is biology spending on their printing this semester? How much did chemistry? And English, wow, someone's printing out books. Who's doing that? But then there's the grant. In this case, I call it a chemistry grant, and I gave it a budget of $5,000. And this is really no different than a grant that your entire department might get anyway for a specific project. So let's say you have a chemistry project. I went to the University of Florida. They developed Gatorade, right? That was a big project at the University of Florida a long time ago. They were probably given a specific budget to come across and try to develop this sports drink. I'm sure it was a lot more than $5,000. But in this case, I've got something that's $5,000, and that means that, hey, you have $5,000 that you can use for printing. After that, there's no more money available for printing. And that enables your the people on that project utilizing that grant discretion to say, maybe I shouldn't print this out because we're limited in how much money we can use for printing. Especially, it's a nice trigger. So once they hit that limit, it's like, wow, we're spending too much money. So that's an option. Instead of using a cost center, which always allows that print job to go through, they can use a grant and have a budget associated with that grant. So this third-party charging, and comes in very handy, especially, like I said, if you have a student worker that fills 2 roles. They're not only just a student, but they're actually working for the university. and it gives them, or organization, it gives them the ability to not have to pay for all of their print jobs. Some of them can go outside. So how do we get these users associated with Pharos inside Pharos Administrator? Well, in most cases, your Pharos Uniprint system is going to have all of its users within the database. There are special times, certain environments where the users are not going to be in the database, but that's rare. And that means that all billing and authentication is actually being done outside of Pharos through an external gateway, like I mentioned earlier. That also means that users don't have full security over their jobs. When they walk up to a release station, they're generally going to see everybody's print jobs. They differentiate theirs from everybody else's by giving it a name, but that doesn't stop me from being able to print out your job if I wanted to. Of course, I don't know what's on that job, but it's not very secure. So in a secure environment, you're going to have all the users within the Pharos database. Now, you can add them just by clicking Insert on the right under Accounts. That's not a very good way of doing it, unless you're just adding an administrator or a proctor or a cashier. But if a general user, you're not going to want to do that, because if you've got 10,000 students, can you imagine clicking Insert and creating a record manually for every student? That's not really a viable way of utilizing this product, or a good use of your time. It's really just, frankly, it's a waste of time. But if you're making one or two, that's great. And if you're making an administrator, a Pharos administrator, or the system, or a proctor or a cashier, then yeah, that's the way you're going to want to do it. Now, you'll notice I've got 5 users here. 2 of them, EDI cashier and offline, are 2 users you can't delete. They're actually not ones you can use either. They're used by the Uniprint system. So we're going to ignore those. And then you see I have admin that was created the installation of Uniprint. And then I've got 2 of them for myself. One is an administrator. That means I can log in with my own credentials rather than having to use admin to Pharos administrator to do everything. I highly recommend that. If you've got too many people using the same login for admin, then you don't know who did what. It's best to create, in my own opinion, users for each individual that's going to be accessing the system. And when you are creating users, you have to designate what role they're going to play. So I'm going to select my second user up here, the one I created for myself, and look at the bottom. We've got our login ID and an alias, which usually matches the login ID. And then the next section down has 4 different options: administrator, cashier, proctor, and user. Now, a user is going to be your general user. It's going to be your student. It's going to be, could be your faculty and staff member, anybody who's just utilizing the system to print their documents and make copies and whatnot. An administrator obviously can do everything. They can configure the entire system. They can break the entire system, add things, delete things, give money to people, take money away, everything within the system. And a cashier and proctor are both very similar to each other. A cashier can do everything a proctor can do, but they can also add, deal with money. They can go into other user accounts and they can give money, take money away. But a proctor is limited to just being able to deal with stock print jobs or something along those matters. Usually you would be given that to either a librarian or a student lab worker, somebody whose job is to help users with problems with printing at the location, not someone in IT. Now, generally, when you're giving the ability for an individual to have a cashier or a proctor, you're not going to give them Pharos administrator. This has the ability to do everything. Instead, you would give them what we call Pharos remote. I'm bringing it up for you. You'll notice it looks just like Pharos administrator. It's built on MMC. It's actually very similar. It's just very stripped down. I don't have access to do all the same things that we can do within Pharos administrator. So this is a different installation. It actually is part of your installers directory in Uniprint on your server. It's also part of what would normally be on a CD in your Uniprint download directory too. This is what you'd want to give them. They can't break anything by doing this. And again, the cashier can do everything a proctor can do, which a proctor can only look at stuck jobs and release jobs and force jobs to go through and whatnot. They can print jobs, but they can also add money and take away money from a user. So you've got administrator, a cashier, a proctor, and a user. You can also make a user inactive. So if the user said no, they're not going to be able to do anything. They're not going to be able to print. They're not going to be able to log in. So you want to make sure that the user is active if you want them to be able to utilize the system, but it's also a great way to get someone's attention. If for some reason you've got a student that's deep in the hole with money, and you've tried everything you can to get a hold of them, and the great way to get their attention is to cut them off from copying and printing. They can't do anything anymore. If you hit them in the no, then they're going to start going up, hey, how come I can't print? Red flag. We've been trying to get a hold of you for 3 weeks. You've been dodging us. Now we got you. So that's come in very handy. I gave that to that idea to a university once, and it worked within like 3 days. They got a hold of the person, and everything was taken care of, and then they made them active again. And then the card idea, using cards for authentication, that will be associated with the user inside the user account here. Passwords, you'll notice that they're not showing up here. The only time you really should see a password inside Pharos Administrator and Uniprint is really if they're an administrator, cashier, or a proctor. A general user, I don't recommend you have passwords in the database. The less you have available to anybody out there, the better off you are as far as security is concerned. There's really no reason to have a password for a general user in there, especially if they're authenticating against Active Directory. If you LDAP, then that's already being taken care of for you. And above that, you'll see group, which I skipped for a moment there. That is the group that is associated to that user's account. And this is different than print groups. Print groups had to do with devices and printers. This group is a user group, which is over here on the left under users with groups. It comes with public by default, and then I created another one called test. And where this comes in handy is that you can, remember I showed you before, you can charge differently based on a group. So if I come back here to the job cost method and turned on user-based charging on the bottom, I can associate that group, that user group, to the attributes and then charge them differently for that. That comes in handy if you're going to charge differently for faculty and staff versus students or some other, maybe even a discount to the art department, because the art department, the students there, they have to, they pay an extra fee for all their art fees and whatnot, so it's covered, their printing fees are covered inside that, so you might charge differently. Address not used as much. Email address is very common, especially if you're using mobile print. Their email address is going to show up on their user account. And then billing on the bottom. There's 2 different ways you can do associate a user's account with billing. First one is advance. Most common means you're requiring money to be in the user's account in order to be able to print or copy, to follow through with that job. If the job costs $2.50 and they have $1.50 in their account and they're set to advance, that job is not going to be permitted and they won't be able to make their copy or send their print job. On the other side of the spectrum, arrears allows them to go into the negative. So let's say the user had $50 in their account. They utilized all of the $50 within their account. They have, let's say they have 10 cents left, okay, and the job cost $5. We're going to allow that to go through if they're set at arrears, because you're allowing them to go into negative. So in some respects, it's like a credit card. It's going, you're giving them credit. I don't know if that works for your organization or not. It does come in as a good tool to use if you don't really care about money and you're just trying to keep track of how much spending is being done by each individual, how much printing is being done. Putting them into arrears allows you to pull Pharos reports on users, and then you can see how much each individual is printing and how much money they're spending. But again, most common is advance. You're going to be charging for your printing and your copying, and you're going to require the user to have money inside their account. Account balance, that's the third section down here. You'll see a number, 360, that's my total. Okay. Then to the right of that, in brackets, you see 3 different figures. We call those purses. You can call them wallets, you can call them anything you want, but they're buckets of money of where everything is set. So if I come over here to the left and I choose System Settings under System, I'll see the free purse names. Now these names could be changed. This is just the default names: technology grant, tuition fees, and user pays. Regardless of what they're called, top down, this would be considered purse 1, that's purse 2, and that is purse 3. So the way it works is that a user will authenticate themselves and say, I want to print this job. Job costs X amount of dollars and cents. Do they have enough money? Let's find out. It goes through purse 1, technology grant. If there's nothing left in there, it then goes to tuition fees. If there's not enough there, it goes into user pays. If there's not enough there, then if there's an external gateway like Blackboard or Seaboard that we mentioned earlier, if there's not enough money there, then it denies the print job and does not allow it to go through. Otherwise, if they have enough money, then allows them to have the print job and everything's fine. All right, excellent. So that is accounts. So, how does the money get in there? So there's several different ways that money gets into a user account. So again, this one's at $360. On the right-hand side, under Actions, you'll notice Credit, Debit, and Set Balance. If I choose Credit, I have my 3 different purses here. If I were to choose User Pays and add, let's say, $20, you look at the balance on the bottom here, the third purse that says $300, that's User Pays, and hit OK. That'll go up to $320, and it ups my total to $380. Debit does the same in reverse. So if I want to take $40 away from User Pays, I type in 40, and you notice it's only this one record that I have selected. I hit OK. I now have, and when it's finished done, $340 in the account with $280 in that particular purse. There's a couple other ways I can handle this. I can select multiple users at once by holding down Control or holding down Shift and getting a whole group, and then make the change. So if I had these 2 selected and go to Credit, you'll notice instead of it saying 1, it'll say 2 users, 2 records because both were selected. So I'm making the change to both. I came across an institution that wanted at the beginning of the semester to give everybody a certain amount of money in one of their purses as free money for printing. It was like $25 or something like that. And then when that's done, it went through and used their own money. That's a nice way of doing it. But there's also another way of achieving that goal, and that is to set the balance. So if instead of giving a credit or taking money away, I can actually set the balance. So if I say, hey, at the beginning of the semester, everybody's going to have $50, or this person's going to have $50, I can choose which purse I want it to go into, type in 50. Now this is just for user pays. It's not for the total. If you look on the bottom of my account here, I've got money in the other purses, and I hit OK. Now my total on the bottom came to $110, and I've got only $50 in my user pays. But that's just for one account. What if I want to do this for a whole bunch of people? Again, I can select them all, or I can go to batch operations on the right here, and I can do a batch credit, a batch debit, or a batch set balance. So if I do batch set balance, it knows that I only have 3 records within my database here, and that's the first 3 that can actually have a balance. That makes sense, because remember I mentioned EDI cashier and offline? Those aren't users that we actually would be using for the system. The actual program uses them for other purposes. So if I wanted to do a batch set balance and give everybody across the board $300 in user pays and click OK, it says set balance for all users. I say yes. Now when I look at admin, admin has $300 and the user pays is $300. If I look at B. Rosengarten, me, I see $360, but my user pays is where I changed it. is $300, and same with Brian_user is at $315 now with $300 in user pays. That's a nice way of doing it. Other items that you could do in batch in the batch operations are probably most common is batch user load. We mentioned, yeah, you can get users into the database one at a time by clicking insert. Not a good use of your time. If you want to get a large group of users, especially if this is a new system for you, or if you want this on an automatic basis that's running through task schedule, we can help you set this up. You can have a file that has 19 different fields, pieces of information that's put together as a text file. It has to be in a very specific order that can be uploaded to the database, and everybody will come in just minutes rather than having to create each user on its own. And again, if that's something you want to do on a daily basis or twice a day, we can help you set up a task scheduler with a batch file that'll automatically go to a specific location that you designate to find that file and use that as its source to upload all the users to the database. And again, earlier, remember I mentioned change control? Here I'm at accounts, control under actions. It's still there. So the batch operations, very, very common thing to use, especially for the user load, and you can use it for adding money and set balances for users. And then scroll down here on the bottom. There's an external billing offline limit. If your external gateway goes down, you can limit how much money can be utilized during that time or what's available, because you can't talk to the gateway if that gateway is down. You still want those users to be able to print while you're working on getting that connection back up, and that enables you to set a specific amount. So if you set it at, say, $10, they have $10 of free printing until you get that back up, and then after that, that individual can't print anymore. And on the bottom, we mentioned the third-party charging in the cost centers and the grants before. You can associate a specific user to a cost center. Right now on the bottom you see cost center permissions, no constraint set. I could associate this cost center to the user. Now I don't have it set up in a way where I have it configured where constraints could be used, but if I were to come in here to the charging model for the third-party charging and enable user constraints and set this to yes, I can either at this point in charging models assign a user group constraint as well, or I can come back to the user account on the bottom, scroll down here, and go back to my cost center permissions and my constraints and say, hey, I want this user, Brian_user, to be part of biology. So now when I go to send my print job from my workstation, it might prompt me, hey, are you charging this to biology or are you charging this to chemistry? Or is this going to be part of something that you're going to charge to yourself? It'll give me that ability. So we talked about user accounts. We talked about user groups. We went through money and batch operations. It brings me to job management on the left here. Probably one of the most frequent places you will come in Pharos Administrator, looking at queued jobs. This will change in real time, not on my system because these are just sitting here waiting for us to look at, but things will appear and disappear and appear and disappear as users submit jobs to a secure queue and then release them at a release station. So I've got 2 queued jobs associated right now with my system. One is just a printout from an HTML page from Google, just a web page, and on the bottom when we look at it, we can see which print group it was sent to, which queue it was sent to, the job name it was given, and the user that submitted the job. You can see what time the job was submitted. It's today at 11:36 in the morning. It was page counted and converted. This one happened to be password protected. So that means when I walk up to a release station to try to release this, it's going to ask me on the screen, what's the password for this job? And if I don't remember it, I'm not getting my print job. How many sheets and how many pages, and that's different. A sheet is an actual piece of paper, and a page could be front and it could be back. So you could have 2 pages with 1 sheet if you're doing duplexing. How many of them are color? Is this a copy? How many, not a copy, I'm sorry, how many copies? So I might have a 5-page document, simplex, only printed on the front, So it's 5 pages, it's 5 sheets, but I may have made 3 copies, one for me, one for my friend, and one for my professor. That would be how many copies. The print attributes, how many pages is this? Is it 8.5 by 11, in this case 612 by 792? Letter, is it color, black and white, simplex or duplex? What type of attributes are associated with this job? And the approximate cost associated with that. And the reason why it says approximate is because based on how they submitted the job, this is how much we're going to say it's being charged. But if somebody decides, hey, I sent this as color, but I've decided I want it as black and white, they can go into the Pharos Print Center, the web page. Actually, I think I have it up here. Yep. And they can decide at that point that they, I don't want this as color. I don't want to spend the money. I'm going to, black and white is sufficient, and they can change the job to black and white. Now, in this case, I actually submitted a black and white job. I didn't do a color one, but had it been color in the PDF file, I could have selected that and then came down here to the bottom and changed that. Here's another Q job to take a look at. This one was submitted through Mobile Print. That was actually, it says Mobile Print Group, but it actually used the Pharos Print Center to upload the job. And you'll notice that every job has its own unique ID. So again, here's my user. The document itself gives the name. It's a PDF. It was page counted. This one's 8 sheets, okay? But it's 16 pages long. So it's 8 pieces of paper, but it's 16 pages because it's duplexing. And it's going to cost me $1.28. So that's Q jobs. This list here, like I said earlier, it's going to, things will come and go within it. Sometimes it doesn't refresh, and you have to come over here to find jobs, and that'll automatically refresh the page. You can list Q jobs based on users, and you can search for them by print group as well as a filter. Brings me to printed jobs under Q jobs. Now, you're probably like me. When I first saw printed jobs, I thought these are jobs that were already printed. That's not what it means. It means, yeah, it kind of does mean that. It means jobs that were already printed, but it means jobs that can still be reprinted. Remember earlier we talked about that reprint time period, not the queue time where things are automatically deleted, but a time period when you want jobs to be able to be reprinted after submission and being printed. And if I remember correctly, that was under devices and printer, reprint holding period by minutes. If the job still falls into that category, you'll see it under printed jobs. Otherwise, if there are none, and maybe your preprint job is set at 0 and you don't want to let anybody reprint things, this will always be blank. If you're looking for jobs that have already printed and can't be reprinted, that will be under transactions on the bottom under system, and we're going to go through that momentarily. So printed jobs, jobs that still can be reprinted. And again, just like Q jobs, you can search based on username or print group. But if everything's set at 0, you're never going to use those filters because it's always going to be blank. You're actually never going to come in here if your reprint period is set to 0 for everything. So let's, with that said, let's come down to system and let's talk about transactions. So transactions, what are they? Yeah, they're print jobs. They're also jobs that were deleted. And anytime money is added to an account, it's considered a transaction as well. And all of these are pieces of information that are stored in the SQL database. So you'll see everything here. Deletes, credit. I don't think I have any print jobs because it's my test system and I haven't actually released anything. But you can come in here and take a look at everything. Now, I stated earlier that Pharos Administrator is based on MMC. One of the limitations of MMC is that when you come into transactions or do any kind of query, you're going to be limited to 1,000 results at once. Now, if you have been using Uniprint and have a big organization, you've been using Uniprint for a long period of time, you're going to have way, way, way more than 1,000 transactions. It's easy to hit 1,000 transactions in just a couple hours with a fairly small institution. So what you're going to have to do is filter out what you might be looking for. All throughout Pharos Administrator, you might have the option to have a filter here. On the right, you'll have the option to remove the filter under transactions. under actions. But if I show the filter, I can filter based on username, maybe a time period. Was it the last hour, last 24 hours, 7 days, or 28 days? What type of transaction am I looking for? Is this a computer transaction? That would be something you use for a sign-up. Is it a print job? Is it something that was deleted? Is it a scan? Which server was the transaction being done on, if you know? Which bank was being used? And we'll come to that moment. And if you know, hey, it was, I don't know any of that information, but I know the guy was charged 55 cents, you might type in 0.55 and then find a transaction that was for 55 cents. These headers are also able to be used for sorting period, ascending and descending when you select them. And in addition, there are some other columns that might be available if you right-click on the headers and any menu that may have a filter. You can come down and obviously you can sort descending and descending and clear the sorting. You can remove a specific column. You can select columns as well. So in this case, there's the only other thing that's available would be offline. But let's see, if I were in accounts and I right-click and I go to select columns, there's a lot of other options that are available to me, whether I want to add a column for being active, their billing option, their email address, which is a common one. And then say I wanted to add email address, I can just select it and drag it over, and now I have a column for email. And if I don't want email here and I want it next to my last name, I just click and drag it over, and now it's over there. So this is something you can do throughout all of Pharos Administrator. So we're going to come back to transactions, and again, this is where you're going to come to look to see if when a print job has actually been printed. When we look at the bottom, we can see the user that the transaction was associated with. This was money, right? So which purse the money was added to, it's because it says credit up here. User pays, which server is being used, when it happened, the type, it's credit, and if I drill down into billing, I can see how much it is. There's bank is inappropriate here. The cashier that used it, and that was the admin user. There's no cost centers associated with this, and offline doesn't matter. If I go to deleted print, I get a whole different data set available to me because it's not a credit, right? What application was used? Well, this was Acrobat Reader. What print group? Mobile print group. How was the job deleted? Because it's a deleted job. How it was deleted manually? I deleted it. Did it expire? No, because I deleted it manually. Which server was used? When? Down to the second. And the type. Again, this is deleted print. Billing doesn't pertain here because it was a deleted print. But if it was a real print job, they would show the cost of the print job, which bank was used, and how many pages that transaction would actually consist of. But sometimes when jobs don't go through properly and you're looking at transactions and you may find the transaction, but it may not be helpful for you to figure out what might have gone wrong. Well, the first place I always go to when there's a problem with a specific print job is alerts on the left under system. This is very helpful. It'll show you information about specific errors that were happening, any kind of auditing that was done, and it's something that might just be informational. So here, for example, I've selected this alert that happened on the 21st. It was an error. See that I tried to print something from msn.com. If I come down to error description, it gives me an error code of 29044. Well, what does that mean? Well, it means unable to print zero-length job. The job actually had no data in it, so that I couldn't print it. If I come up to auditing, I can see that the alert here is not really that something went wrong. It's more that, hey, someone made a change. It's in addition to the transaction. Someone made a change, and this is the person who did it. If you're interested in the error codes, they're all available on our Pharos community. You can just do a search for error codes or Uniprint error codes, and you'll get a full list, because they do change, and we update it in one location now rather than having it accessible to you within the documentation that comes with the CD. It's easier for us and better for you if we just maintain it in one location. That way we can have those error codes updated more frequently. So transactions and alerts, very common place for you to come to under system. Where else are you going to come to? Banks. We mentioned this earlier. Remember I said has to do with money, but it has to do with a lot more than just money. If you look at banks, yeah, it's got a big dollar sign there. That's indicative of money, right? But not always. So what is the bank used for? It's used for money, and it's also used for, when I say money, I'm talking about billing. How is billing being taken care of? Is there an external gateway or whatnot? And let me come over here to the default bank. All these banks, by the way, that you see on my screen all came with the Uniprint installation. The default bank is the one that I recommended earlier that you not use and keep pushed aside in case you don't want to charge for jobs. It's easy for you to just change your print groups to the default bank for job and then not have to charge anything. But what do we do here? We set our plugins for both billing and login, and there's other options which I'm not going to go through. But let's say you're communicating to your Active Directory through LDAP. You might come into Logon and choose the executable plugin associated with the login. It might be a script that you've written or had us write for you. Or in this case, if I'm using LDAP, I might use a LDAP logon executable, and I would select it. And then anytime anybody walks up to a release station that's associated with this bank, the first thing it's going to do is go through the logon event, and it means it's going to use the LDAP logon.exe. It's going to look for criteria that the user has input, and it's going to test it against the LDAP server, and if it passes, then it's going to go to the billing event. And sometimes the billing event actually can be used for authentication as well. If you're looking for a specific user account for money on the other end, if it's not there, they're not going to be able to log in and do anything. They're not going to be able to print or copy because they won't have money to be able to do so. So yeah, the bank has to do with money, but it also has to do with authentication. And everything's set at this point. You also see there's two other sections, network terminal and PC Pharos station. So the network terminals, that would be your Omega devices and your IMFPs. And you can decide whether for all of those terminals that are utilizing this bank, whether or not you want to allow people to be able to log on using their ID and password, or do you want to allow them to use a blank password? Do you want to allow log on using a card in addition to log on with a username and a password? So, there's also something here that says enable card registration. This one's grayed out because it just happens to be grayed out at the moment. And what that means is, let's say it's a brand new installation for you. Rather than going through an upgrade, you've decided, I'm going to do a fresh install. But we mentioned how to get those users in there manually or using a batch user load. You can also allow users to come in into the Pharos database by using card registration. And how that works is the user is given a card. It may be used for many different purposes on the campus, but it's also tied into Uniprint with a card ID that's unique to that specific user. The first time they're using the system, they'll walk up to the device, they'll swipe their card, and it'll look in our system and say, I don't see this card in here. I don't know who you are. Who are you? Please type in your username and password, and then it may go out to Active Directory or the LDAP server and authenticate them that way. And once it says, hey, this is Bob Smith, this is his card ID, Bob's got the right credentials, he's not in the Pharos database, let's add him in. So it'll add in his username and his card ID. So therefore, when he goes to print a job using his Active Directory credentials on his workstation, it'll come through with that job associated with him because he's now been added into the Pharos database. A nice, really clean way of getting users into the Pharos database without having to use a batch user load or manually entering them in. This is for a first time or for new users that have never used the system, maybe a new student. Obviously, when students go to school, they are usually part of a school for at least 2 years, and then every semester you get new and new students, and other students graduate or leave. So the new ones, you want to be able to get them in there, and that's one way of being able to do so. The only caveat to utilizing that card registration is that when users first walk up, for the very first time with their card, they will be required to type in their username and password. There's no way around that. It's just a one-time thing, and then after that, you're done. And then the PC Pharos station, remember, that is the dedicated PC that is being used as a release station. You can designate in the bank. What's their source of identification? Is it an ID and password dialog box that we're prompting? Are they going to be using a card? There's a whole list of different options: ID card, a serial, a keyboard wedge. So you have to choose what works best. And this is different than the network terminal. Just keep that in mind. This is specific to a PC Pharos station. And then how are we getting money? What is the source of the payment? And in a lot of cases, it's going to be a card reader or whatnot. So they're getting their card ID from the card reader to authenticate, and the source of payment also would be maybe the ID number that is on that card that will be used to match against the Pharos user. So we talked about the plugins that are used here for billing and logon. Sometimes scripts are needed for either custom work that we'll make for you, or there's certain situations that you might want to take care of, or those one-off things. And if a script is being used under system, on the bottom left here you'll see scripts. Those scripts are input into the system. They're not part of the system. They don't get there on their own. So I've got two here, and they're identical. I just called one of them test script. When you have a script in here already and you want to view it, sometimes if you're having a problem and we're asking you to help us troubleshoot, and we might email you or ask you, hey, can you get us the script? You may not know what we're talking about, how to get it. So it's here. You come in and you go to source. You'll see an ellipsis button here on the right. When you select it, you actually see all the code. Now, what I recommend generally is just to click on it, hit Control-A to highlight it, and Control-C is an iPhone keyboard shortcut, or I can right-click right and go to Copy, and then paste it into Notepad, save it as a text file, and send it to us. I did the same thing by creating another script. I took that script from the first one we were just looking at. I created a new script by hitting Insert, and when I came in here and hit the ellipsis, I just pasted it in. Now, one thing I recommend is if you're one of those people who likes to look at scripts and try to figure out what's going on or try troubleshooting, by all means, don't make any changes in here. What I usually recommend, again, highlight and Control-C or copy, and then open up Notepad and on your server, and then just paste it in there, and then work from this. Because if you make a change to the script within Uniprint, it's made, and there's no backup of it. So work outside of Uniprint. Just use the Uniprint script as a source to get what the script is and work from it in another application. That's what I highly recommend. My favorite thing that I've been waiting towards the end, we're not at the end yet, that is in Uniprint 9.0 R2 in their system, is the updater service. This is a long time waiting, and I know any of you out there who have been administrators of Uniprint for quite some time know that it was an arduous task to put in hot fixes or put in service packs, especially if you had several servers and many different Pharos administrators throughout your environment, not just your computer and workstation, but maybe 3 or 4 other people or even more. We now have the updater service from the comfort of your own workstation with a Pharos administrator, or if you're using Pharos administrator on a server, you can come in here and using the drop-down, now I don't have anything in my drop-down because I only have one server, you can see all of the servers that are available, all your print servers, your principal server, and all of the Pharos administrators that are out there as part of your network. And you can update them right from the comfort of your own workstation. The person who has that Pharos administrator installed on their own server, they may not even know about it, that you're upgrading them. And that's great, because there are many times where if there were 5 people out there with a Pharos administrator, 3 of them were updated and the other 2 weren't. But what you could do, and this is more, you notice it probably looks more like Windows Update. You can download when you're ready and then install when you're ready. So you can download at any time, and then schedule. I still recommend you schedule your updates, especially if whatever you're updating is going to affect the overall system. You don't want to bring down printing. When I say bring it down, it might just be for 20, 30 seconds, but still, some institutions don't even allow it unless it's an off hour. So, but at least you can do your downloading in the middle of the day. And if it's Pharos administrator, by all means, do whenever you want. And you can see a full list of everything that was installed recently as well. And you can do this for every server in every Pharos administrator that's on your network. It's awesome. I love it. So packages. I'm going to go ahead and collapse system here, and on the left go to packages. So how do we get these queues onto users' workstations? Well, obviously there's Mac packages, and I'm not going to go through that in this conversation. We don't have time for that. However, if you're really interested in how to make a Mac package, put forth a request. Maybe we can schedule another webinar specifically on Mac packages. But I also went out of my way and created a post in our Pharos community that shows in great detail with screenshots and whatnot, step-by-step on how to create Mac packages. So you can look that up. But if you want to do it for Windows, you can do it right in the Pharos Administrator. And there's 3 pieces of information here that are of note for packages and global settings. The second one is actually a web page where users can go on their workstations to download the packages after they're made. It's the Uniprint web page, and you can see there's a packages area here, and I have one called AUC Students. If I were to click on this, it will download an auto-detect application. You'll notice it's only 2 megs. It's very small, right? But the package itself is rather large. And what's the auto-detect? It looks at the user's workstation and to determine whether it is a 64-bit or a 32-bit system. Now, if you've only made 64-bit packages, and the auto-detect really is just going to see that, hey, it's 64-bit, and just give them the 64-bit. However, if they have a 32-bit system, it will only give them the 32-bit. So rather than having everything download both, which might be 200 megs or greater, it only needs to download what they need. So I went into my C drive here on my server, inetpub www.root in the Uniprint website, and you'll see the files that the packages are actually made. Now, I only have 64-bit. The LTE is your auto-detect. You see it's only at 2 megs, but my 64-bit package is 87 megs. So if you were downloading 64-bit and a 32-bit, you can see how that would get kind of large, and it uses up your networks, and there's really no need to have both if you only need one. If for some reason you don't want users going to that web page to get that information, you can easily take the files from here, put them someplace else on your network, or maybe a web page with a link to it, and they can easily get those files from here. And then on the top, you notice the location where the package files will be built to. That's where I just was, on inetpub www.root and Uniprint. And then the shared network location that the source files are stored in is here with the server name, program files, x86, Pharos bin in the shared directory. Now, creating a package is really quite simple, but what's in a package? If we come to the bottom of package definitions, we see the Pharos supplied modules, and you'll notice there's 2 options. There's 3 things in there, but there's only 2 options for you. And why is that? Well, the pop-up client is a necessity. It's part of the package. You can't get away with not having as part of the package. But the uninstaller and the automatic updater are options. They're not required at all. But by all means, I highly recommend that you use the uninstaller. If someone is installing a piece of software in their workstation, give them the means of being able to uninstall it if they don't need it anymore. So I always recommend including the uninstaller inside the package. But the automatic updater, there's some benefits and disadvantages to using the automatic updater. Benefits are if you make a change to the package, which would consist of queues and drivers that you're going to incorporate into this package, and you didn't have the automatic updater on, then every time you make a package change and you rebuild the package by hitting Build Package here on the far right under Actions, that user would then have to be required to go back out, re-download the package, and reinstall it to pick up those changes. And getting that to everybody to do that, it might be very difficult, especially if you've got 35,000 students. That's not going to happen. Most students won't even pay attention. But if you have the automatic updater as part of the package, and they downloaded the package with the automatic updater as already part of it, and then they installed that package, and you make a change to a queue, maybe change a driver, or you're adding queues or taking away queues from them, and then you rebuild the package, the user's workstation, it's generally the first print job of each day. It'll go out and use the updater service to look to the Uniprint server and say, hey, are there been any changes to this package? And if there were, it'll download them at that point in time and install them on the user's workstation. If not, it'll say there's no changes, and it goes on for the rest of the day without really going out and repolling to see if there's any updates. So it generally happens in the first print job of the day. Very, very handy. Well, I said there was a disadvantage. It's not a really big disadvantage, but the disadvantage to me personally is that something is going to flash up on the user's workstation saying, hey, we're looking for updates. And someone might find that annoying, and then it might say, hey, there's updates. We're going to install them. Great, okay. And then they'll say, hey, your updates have been installed. You're all done. If there are no updates, it'll say, we're looking for updates. There's no updates, and it's done. So it's really not a horrible disadvantage. It's just some people don't like that message popping up. But otherwise, how do you know if it's being done or not? Right? To set the queues associated with this package, you come down to the bottom. You can have as many queues as you want. So you can have as many packages as you want. You might have a package that's designated specifically for the chemistry department. And here's their 2 or 3 queues, or 1 queue that would give them access to whatever you wanted them to have access. Students might have 1 package, staff might have 1 package, faculty might have another package. The CIO might have a different, the president of the university might have a different package. Whatever you can dream up and put together as any kind of combination, you can create a package for. The important thing is to understand here the last build time. It gives you the date down to the second. A lot of times I've come across customers who've made changes to their package and they forget to build the package. And I'll see this date, and this is like 2015 in there. So, well, it doesn't look like you rebuilt it. Oh, and it'll tell you if you made a change and you must rebuild it. It'll say right here, must rebuild. So if I go to build this package, it won't take long. Well, it shouldn't take long.
Brian?
Just hit start, it'll go. Yes, sir.
Just want to do a time check. We have 5 minutes left. Want to make sure you're able to come to a close here, and we can,
I have 5 minutes worth of information to give.
Okay. We will have a couple of small announcements at the end of your 5 minutes, so go for it.
I actually need about 2, and then I'll be all done.
Okay, thanks.
So that's the packages. They're accessible from the Uniprint webpage. The last section I wanted to talk about under system here is the knowledge base. If you're one of those people like me who likes to solve things on their own and you may not want to come to Pharos support, there's a browser embedded within the Pharos Administrator. You can click on knowledge base, type for anything up here. We're always adding documents to our knowledge base on a very regular basis. Anything we run into that we feel that should be shared with you, we will create a document and it's available to you. And if you'd rather call us or contact support, on the right here it says submit a ticket. You can call us or you can email us at support@pharos.com. And if you already have an account to create tickets, you can submit a support request just by clicking on this button right here, right from Pharos Administrator, or obviously you can go to our webpage. A lot of this information is also available on a Pharos community, which I believe, Frank, this video will also be posted on.
Yeah,
last thing I want to show.
The knowledge base is posted on the community as well. And I want to make sure that everybody knows that we've got a strong effort this year to update the knowledge base. So the self-service capability for finding answers to issues, common issues, problems, will be enhanced throughout the rest of this year as the team continues to add articles and clean up old articles.
And Frank, if I may just point out one last thing about Pharos Administrator, and this is extremely helpful. Most people don't know about this. If you happen to be on a specific area within Pharos Administrator and you want to pull up the help topic, you can simply just hit the F1 key, and whichever area you are within Administrator, it'll bring up the help topic for that. And you can always search as well on there. Very, very handy. But I want to thank you for your time, and we'll open this up. I don't know how much time we have.
Yeah. So Brian, I think instead of Q&A, what we're going to do is, because we're at the end of the time here, is I've gotten a number of questions in the chat. We've answered a bunch of those as quick as we could here throughout the presentation. The ones that we didn't answer yet, we will be answering and posting alongside the recording of the session. I'm sure we're also going to have a way for additional questions to be asked in that discussion forum on our community site. So additional questions that might have come up from this. I want to mention that we will have, again, another probably 5 sessions this year. We'll continue to send emails out notifying people of what those sessions will be. We will also be sending a survey out about this webinar and would really, really appreciate you responding with some comments and suggestions about the next webinar and really where you might be lacking some information. We'll do our best to you know, pick those that we're hearing a lot of questions on and do that for the next session. So and then finally, one other thing was just again the user conference. As we get closer to that, we'll be sending some more information out about that for sometime next year, and hopefully customizing it even more to meet the needs of our user base. So from support, from Brian, myself, Frank, Jeff, thank you very much for joining today. Hopefully it was helpful. We'll look forward to hearing back from you. And again, we'll have an active discussion going in the community site. So thank you. Have a good afternoon, or morning, or evening, depending upon where you are. Bye-bye.